All right, we are reading the workbook lessons now of A Course in Miracles. We're on lesson 4. I have also been reading the Song of Prayer, just in case you're interested, on this channel, so you can check that out. The Song of Prayer is a supplement to A Course in Miracles. And lesson 4. The first few lessons, or if you're new to A Course in Miracles, the first few lessons are a little bit tough. You know, they start with nothing I see in this room means anything. That's the first lesson. And then lesson 2, I've given everything I see in this room all the meaning that it has for me. Lesson 3, I do not understand anything I see in this room. And now lesson 4 is these thoughts do not mean anything. They're like the things I see in this room, and then in brackets, on the street, from this window, in this place. So let's read that one more time. These thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on the street, from this window, in this place. Now, if you're new to the course, this is a little bit hard to understand what is being gotten at here, and maybe it might turn you off even a little bit. But let's read it, and then we'll talk about it. Unlike the preceding ones, these exercises do not begin with the idea for the day. In these practice periods, begin with noting the thoughts that are crossing your mind for about a minute. Then apply the idea to them. If you are already aware of unhappy thoughts, use them as subjects for the idea. Do not, however, select only the thoughts you think are, quote, bad, unquote. You will find, if you train yourself to look at your thoughts, that they represent such a mixture that, in a sense, none of them can be called, quote, good, unquote, or, quote, bad, unquote. This is why they do not mean anything. In selecting the subjects for the application of today's idea, the usual specificity is required. Do not be afraid to use, quote, good, unquote, thoughts as well as, quote, bad, unquote. None of them represents your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. The, quote, good, unquote, ones are but shadows of what lies beyond, and shadows make sight difficult. The, quote, bad, unquote, ones are blocks to sight and make seeing impossible. You do not want either. This is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. The aim here is to train you in the first steps toward the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. It is a first attempt in the long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside you and the meaningful within. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. In using your thoughts for application of the idea for today, identify each thought by the central figure or event it contains. For example, this thought about blank does not mean anything. It is like the things I see in this room, on the street, and so on. You can also use the idea for a particular thought that you recognize as harmful. This practice is useful, but is not a substitute for the more random procedures to be followed for the exercises. Do not, however, examine your mind for more than a minute or so. You are too inexperienced as yet to avoid a tendency to become pointlessly preoccupied. Further, since these exercises are the first of their kind, you may find the suspension of judgment in connection with thoughts particularly difficult. Do not repeat these exercises more than 3 or 4 times during the day. We will return to them later. All right, so these thoughts do not mean anything, and you apply them indiscriminately. And what are they aimed at? Suspension of judgment. That's what Jesus says here. The suspension of judgment. We're learning to suspend judgment about our thoughts. Instead of labeling our thoughts good or bad, which we tend to do, we're ultimately going to see that all of our thoughts are either hiding what lies behind them. Those would be the bad thoughts, right? They're blocks to true vision, or they are merely shadows of what our true thought which is thinking with God, really is. So even the thoughts like, for example, we had a nice time with them, with those people. That was nice, thoughts like that, or, anything, any kind of positive thought that we might have. Jesus is saying, while we think those are good thoughts, good and bad, we're getting beyond all judgment of what our thoughts are. And all of our thoughts, in a sense, are not our true thoughts. And thus they are really meaningless. They're coming from the ego. In selecting the subjects for the application of today's idea, the usual specificity is required. Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represent your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. And then he says this exercise will be repeated in different forms throughout the workbook. You can use this exercise for all thoughts, any thought, but don't do it for more than a minute. And partly because Jesus doesn't want us to get too preoccupied or obsessed with this. He doesn't want us to go overboard. Remember that sense of leisure that he started with. Have a sense of leisure about this whole thing. A balance, right? Moderation. Don't go crazy with this. So anyway, that's it for today. I hope that was helpful, and we'll keep going, trying to do this every day now. One lesson a day for a whole year. Thank you. We'll see you soon.